Hello, good evening and welcome. Thank you all so much for coming. It's great to see so many new and returning faces here tonight. And thank you for all of our friends in the Global Systems Institute for coming. For those of you who don't know, my name is Alex. I'm going to be your chair for this evening. I'm one of the new president-elects of the Debating Society. We're a society that encourages free debate and discussion. We run show debates like this every week throughout the year. We also run training workshops and socials. So if any of you would be interested in that and aren't members already, please do check out our social media. We'll be posting all of our stuff for the new year in September there. So please do come along and look at that. And we also thank our partners for the Global Systems Institute who put so much work and effort into all of this. We don't usually run events like this in term 3, and we wouldn't have been able to if it weren't for all the huge amount of effort they put in. If you are interested in some of the subjects we're discussing tonight, if you're interested in how we can work together to solve some of the global problems facing humanity, I'd highly recommend you subscribe to their mailing list because they run debates, they run panels like this throughout the entire year. They're all fantastic, and it'd be great for you guys to check them out. They're all, I believe, free as well. So please do check that out. For those of you who are regulars, our format's going to be a little bit different than usual. Usually we'd have a very fixed proposition, opposition, but not tonight. Tonight we have 4 speakers, all prepared to agree, disagree, support each other, debate each other on a range of different subjects over the course of the evening. Fixate on one motion, proper opposition. For the first half, I'm going to be asking questions to them. I know I'm not a subject specialist, so very happily, the Global Systems Institute has helped me out writing some fantastic questions that should provoke some great discussion. In the second half, it's going to be over to you to ask all questions from the audience, so please do start thinking. Throughout, the panel is going to be free to debate and discuss. Then I'm not going to have too much control. I'm going to let them take it away because they are the experts and kind of step in whenever they want to. We're then discussing how we can make our food systems more secure, accessible, and sustainable, and how food supply fits into all the problems facing us in the world today. But for those of you who are DevStop regulars, some things are the same as always. We'll be giving away a bottle of wine at the end of the evening for our best question. We also have a tie as a non-alcoholic option available. DevStop tie. Just a warning off the top of the bat, we are being recorded this evening. I hope that's okay. The camera's on me, not on the audience, but if you do ask a question, that will be picked up by the microphones, just so you all know ahead of time. I'm now going to quickly throw it to Matt, who's just got some quick announcements on some upcoming Debating Society events over the next week or two.
Yeah, so first we're once again running our PIM social excited because I begins to the 1st of June. If you want to celebrate the end of the term season, or if you're just annoyed as I am that in P10 PIM is always our stop, so please come along and celebrate the end of term with us there. We also have a competition going up on the 4th of June, which is our Ironman competition, which for those of us familiar with VB debating, it's basically the same format as always, but you're only on your own, you don't have a teammate. And even before that, we have a workshop to practice, which is in the AI arena, which I did not know we even had, nor am I not entirely sure why they let us host in a supercomputer. But if you want to come along, we can have a workshop 7 PM on the 29th of May. So that's pretty much all I'll ask for the end of this term. So yeah. Actually, I'll add that. Yeah, I don't know my slides, so that's great. And also we've had to send our form to everyone on the emails, some competitions. Please, if you as soon as possible, if you want to go sig out, we can go work out where we want to send people out. So please have a look if you'd like to do some more debating and prep your skills over summer for the start of next year. Back to you guys.
Thank you very much. It's now my pleasure to introduce our panel for this evening. Abi Reader, Deputy President of the Welsh National Farmers Union. Tom Powell, Dr. Tom Powell, academic leading in global food systems and land use. Singh-Watson, farmer, entrepreneur and founder of the Riverford Organic Food Group. And Dr. Virginia Thomas, conservation expert and research fellow. We give them a round of applause, please. My friends will pick you up. There's no need to pick them up, or I think it's there on the table for people listening online. I'm now going to give our speakers a brief opportunity just to introduce themselves better than I possibly could, and give a little bit of background on why they're speaking on the topic tonight. I don't know if you have any preference to start. Guy, you'd be happy to go first?
Yeah, 5 minutes, did you say?
Like about two to 3.
That's fine. Okay, I'm Guy Singh-Watson. I founded the Riverford Organic Farmers 40 years ago, growing vegetables organically on a very small scale. Tiny, it really was, a wheelbarrow and a borrowed tractor, and today it's a £100 million business with 1,000 co-owners. I say co-owners because as of next week, it's 100% owned by its staff, now co-owners. We deliver organic vegetable boxes. We work very closely with growers throughout Devon, but also across England, and in Europe, a lot of Southern Europe, particularly this time of year, we're importing, starting into the UK season, but we do import a lot through the spring and early summer. And I've now, having sold the business to its co-owners, I've now gone back. I still work at Riverford, but I've gone back to farming on a actually much smaller scale, not quite a wheelbarrow. But my wife and I bought a 150-acre farm where we host a lot of very small land-based businesses, and I'm interested in how we can farm sustainably, but hand in hand with promoting biodiversity and carbon sequestration, but also promoting, I don't know, I guess society, social cohesion, and trying to make farming a kind of bit more of a social activity. That's probably 2 minutes, I should think.
Just about, thank you very much. Ginny, do you want to take that?
I'm Ginny Thomas. I'm an environmental and social scientist, and I do my research at Exeter. I work on rewilding and species reintroductions, but I'm particularly interested in how these things affect the people and society and the communities around them. So one of the things with rewilding is depending on how it's communicated, really affects how it's received. And where Abi, or near in Wales, where Abi works, there's a really good example of how it's communicated really badly, and the organisation involved had to withdraw. And so I'm interested in how, if you set these things up well from the beginning, they can be received very differently, and you can combine rewilding and agriculture to get sort of win-wins so you can get food production with environmental benefits, and you get high value food production, high welfare, and low environmental impact. So it probably overlaps a bit with what Tom looks at in terms of ecological restoration. But what's, I think, interesting is that the only thing I see in terms of food production from rewilding is meat production. And what you get is really low quantities of very high cost meat. So unless we change the amount of meat we eat, if we're going to have to import meat from somewhere else, and then that pushes our environmental impact to somewhere else. And it also doesn't answer questions of things like dairy production, horticulture and arable production. So I'm really interested in what Guy and Abi have got to say about those other foods rather than just meat.
You mentioned Tom, let's flip over the tables, Tom, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit.
Thanks. Hi, yeah, I'm Tom Powell, Research Impact Fellow for the Global Systems Institute here at Exeter. Hard to pinpoint where my background in this starts, really. I think it really starts with reading a book by Jim Lovelock as a teenager, which told this incredible story of how life had co-evolved with the planet, such that it plays this intimate role in defining the composition of the atmosphere and the climate that we experience as a global system, which kind of immediately led me to this question of, okay, well, if humans are actively managing half of the plant life on the surface of the planet, that means we're taking a really active role in that global system, defining the composition of the atmosphere, changing the climate through our activities on the land surface. And what does that mean for our role as kind of responsible members of that system or stewards of that system? So I got involved in thinking about how climate change might impact agriculture, but then for my PhD, really worked on sort of modeling agriculture as a global human impact on the Earth system. How much biomass do we harvest as a species? How much of the sort of ecological productivity of the planet do we harvest as a species, and where does it end up, and how do we use it? And that was really interesting because it highlights a few kind of key parts of that global biomass harvest system that have a disproportionate impact on the sustainability of the system as a whole and our relationship with the planet. But it was also kind of very abstract and technocratic, and I learned a really important lesson quite late in my PhD when I was invited to participate in a project with an artist where a collective of us became co-owners in a crop of wheat with a farmer and had to take responsibility for deciding how to manage it and who to sell it to, and all of these really important things that, you know, real people operating on the management of the land actually face, the constraints within which they work. And I realized that you know, there was a lot more complexity and nuance to understanding this system and how we could alter it than I was really addressing by this sort of very top-down view. And since then, I've done a lot more work sort of with farmers, thinking about how to sort of, how we can navigate this transition productively together. I have projects in East Africa with smallholder and subsistence farmers who are facing a particular set of challenges and coming up with a particular set of innovations. We've worked with farmers here in the Ruby country, sort of trying to imagine what a net zero farming landscape might look like here in the country. And on top of that, we're still doing some of this sort of big systems thinking, and we wrote a report with an organisation called the Food and Land Use Alliance last year, looking at what we call positive tipping points, so those sort of tipping points for reconfiguring systems with positive impacts, and trying to think about whether there are sort of positive tipping points that could drive rapid changes for sustainability in the global food system.
Fantastic. Thank you. Last but certainly not least, Abi.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm Abi Reader. I am from Cardiff in Wales. I'm a third generation farmer. So I'm farming on my father's farm. I'm also third generation on my mother's side of the family as well. And all of the cows, so we're a mixed farm. We're mainly dairy, but we also do beef, sheep and arable. We used to be a very traditional mixed farm where we sort of did equal amounts of everything. But as time has moved on, we've become specialist, and largely dairy is our main trade on the farm. All of the cows on that farm are descended from both sets of grandparents, so they've been with us for generations. I'm completely cow obsessed. I'm very heavily involved in managing the dairy herds. The rest of the farm I leave to my uncle, who's a partner in the business as well. My day will usually start at 4:15 in the morning, every morning. Sometimes it doesn't finish till 8, 9, maybe 10 at night. I eat, sleep and breathe farming. We supply into a commercial world. We are supplying 8,000 pints every single day to a large supermarket. That supermarket will pay us on a cost of production model. So we are required to show them all of our books, show them absolutely everything in terms of our cost, and they will make a decision then on how much they pay you. All of those costs will be put into a pool, and they'll take an average of the group of people who are supplying them and take the average from that. So if you are the person with the highest costs, chances are you're not going to be in that pool for that long. It's quite a savage environment to supply into if you are supplying commercially, which 90% of farmers would be across England and Wales. And then finally, I live next door to Barry. So although I'm from just outside Cardiff, so it doesn't really sound that rural, does it? You know, it's certainly not as rural as this, and this is quite built up. But we live next door to Barry, and for those of you who watch Gavin and Stacey, and I'm afraid I don't watch TV, I hear a lot about it, and Barry Island. So Barry is the poorest town in Wales, and I can't quite see it from my farm, but I can almost make out the haze of the lights, the street lights on the horizon. And every morning when I start milking, without fail, I will look outside that shed, and I'll look across to the lights and remember that there are children there that will go to school that day and they won't have had breakfast. Chances are they'll have lunch because they'll be in school as long as they haven't skipped it. They'll probably go home and not have tea. And these are the people that people like me are feeding. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much. We're going to get started with some questions from me to begin with. Feel free to either go direct to individuals or two people or the whole group, but feel free to jump in at any point after that. Don't wait on me to bring you in. I think if you have anything to expand on someone said, disagree with what they said, don't wait on me to get involved with that. But I want to start with Tom as someone who's leading us on kind of global food systems. I wonder if you could just give us a brief kind of introduction to you, and I think you referenced it in your opening, how our production, consumption, distribution of food really impacts our environment and what scale this is on.
Yeah, sure. So in environmental terms, as a global system, there are lots of different metrics we can use and different ways of counting this, right? So I'll try and speak in as few different metrics as I can. But broadly speaking, if you start from very basic principles, food is like our ecology. Producing food is our ecology. This is how we harvest energy from the environment. that happens, the basis of that food chain is photosynthesis. And photosynthesis on the land surface of the earth fixes about 60 billion tons of carbon every year from the atmosphere. Of that, we harvest or otherwise appropriate about a quarter, which is about 15 billion tons of carbon. And about maybe 10% of that ends up in actual food that we eat. So there's a sort of very basic metric for the scale of our ecological footprint relative to other forms of life on the planet. That gives some sense of the scale of our impacts. Tim over there was involved a number of years ago in setting out a concept called planetary boundaries. So these are sort of 9 key Earth system processes where we think there may be sort of thresholds that it would be dangerous for us to exceed in terms of our environmental impact on the planet. I might try and remember them all, but when I count them up, so the key ones are among those, other than sort of climate change is one. We think that agriculture drives about, food production drives about between a quarter and a third of greenhouse gas emissions. Nutrient pollution is another sort of manipulation or distortion of global nutrient cycles. Humans have roughly doubled the flow of active nitrogen on the planet in the since the Green Revolution, in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Biodiversity loss, habitat change and deforestation driven by agriculture are the largest drivers of biodiversity loss on the planet. You know, at least, you know, the majority of those planetary boundaries, I think agriculture is the major driver of. Freshwater use is a really significant one. And you know, there's sort of, there's so many ways of counting this up. I mean, another statistic that I find really powerful is if you look at the mammal biomass on the planet, 96% of the biomass of mammals on the planet is our livestock. So that's, cows, chickens, sheep, goats, by and large. And they're really powerful. No getting away from the fact that it's huge.
Fantastic. And a lot of people here are kind of people who've taken very innovative approaches or research very innovative approaches towards altering or changing this or making it in a more sustainable way. I wanted to come in on Guy as someone who's been an entrepreneur and kind of made organic farming and organic distribution of food really accessible and kind of commercially successful as well. I was wondering, in your kind of view, driving this on a kind of larger scale, can change like that be driven by groups and individuals like you, or do you think it needs higher bodies like the state?
I wish I could say that we were accessible. We are quite expensive. And it is one of the great sadnesses of my life that it's not truly accessible. And when I hear someone, you know, on a modest income who has chosen to, I'm very touched by that, but I'm afraid to say it's really not that common, and probably not that common because, you know, producing the food the way most people would like it to be produced, that respects those facts that we are contributing to half of biodiversity loss and a quarter to a third of climate change, yet we only generate 1.6% of GDP in this country. I mean, clearly we need to be looking less, I would say, at the price and more of the consequences of farming, you know, and to manage and set a policy for our farming based on market prices is just ridiculous. Of course, we don't have a policy. It's laughable, the idea that, but I'm not answering your question at all. In fact, I think I might have forgotten what it was. So can scale be the answer to any of these problems? Unfortunately, my sort of observation is that large scale farming tends to be bad farming. Doesn't have to be, but I mean, the reality of it is, I think Abi referred to the fact that her farm has become less of a mixed farm and more of a specialist farm. I'm delighted that you asked the mixed farm because you're a rarity. I mean, most British farms have become, over my lifetime, you know, progressively larger and larger, bigger and bigger scale and more specialized. You know, so it is now, most farmers are, I would say 95% of agricultural production is you're a specialist poultry producer, you're a specialist pig producer, you're a specialist dairy producer, or you're a specialist producer of combinable crops. And about the only mixed farming is we've got people who have got beef and sheep. I mean, that is the reality of farming in this country. And that simplification of farming systems is so at odds with nature, and you know, which is always complex. There's nothing more complex than a rainforest, or even, you know, a really complex broad, you know, wildflower meadow, or, you know, some of our indigenous woodlands. So, you know, we are working at scale has dictated a form of agriculture, which is unfortunately completely unsustainable. And you know, and also not massively productive, actually. I was talking to Tom earlier about how productive some of the farmers that he's worked with in East Africa are with a multi system approach with incredible diversity on their farms. And I've seen exactly the same in Uganda and with the farmers that I've worked with there. And it is astonishing how productive a more complex system of agriculture can be. But that is not, you know, we're being driven by the market, which Abi referred to, towards a system of farming which is incredibly ever simpler, ever larger, and ever less sustainable.
Well, I'd love to get Abi into.
Yeah, it was just really to support what Guy's saying. I mean, we know from surveys that still 80% of consumers will buy food on price. And that's not because people will always buy the best food that they can afford. They're still going to be focused on price. And you have to have that specialization for the economies of scale. So for example, being a dairy farmer, you have to be able to justify that milk tanker to come down your drive. They're not going to come down your drive if you're only milking sort of 40 or 50 cows, not anymore. You need to be milking sort of 80 or 100, or at least have some neighbors around you that are doing the same amount. So we're in a very different system. Of the all the milk we produce in Wales, 50% of it will leave Wales for England to be processed and pasteurized, bottled, and then it will come back. This is how our food system is set up, really. And then just sort of to touch on a bit of, you know, farming systems in Africa, some incredible systems out here that evolve completely differently to ours. As an example, there is a company not too far from here, actually. I'm trying to think with the base. It's just outside Exeter. They're called UK Sires. And they are sharing genetics from British cows with various countries in Africa to try and help them improve the yield and the longevity of the cows they've got out there. So there's a village, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of it. I'll have to look it up. There's a village somewhere that's received genetics from the UK, which means that their cows no longer produce 2 litres each a day. So that's about 4 pints. They now produce 4 litres each a day. That means that family can feed their family and sell that excess to bring a bit of income back in. So these are how global food systems are working.
Anyone else has something? I think we're coming particularly on that, but I wanted to say maybe, what do you, on the first point there about farms becoming more specialised and kind of issues around that and the issues around marketisation perhaps, what do you see as any potential solutions there, if there are any, from any of you?
I'm interested in investigating how, you know, at what scale of production can be economically viable, and by that I mean someone has to be able to earn 30,000. And there's 6 businesses on our farm, and 3 of them are managing that quite confidently, and 2 of them are in a fledgling state where I think it's questionable, and that's achieved largely by selling direct to the consumer and you know, enjoying the entire retail price. I mean, it's very hard to do it. You know, well, supermarkets don't want to buy from, as Abi was saying, they don't want to buy from someone who had 20 cows, as my father started with, and they don't want to buy from someone who produces, you know, just 100,000 lettuces a week. You know, that would be nothing. You know, you're talking about a massive scale. They want to reduce their transactional costs, and they don't want to be dealing with people. Even, you know, the farmers that Riverford buys from are mostly, you know, small, medium-scale family farms that have no future in our current food system. I mean, if it wasn't for Riverford, they would not be in business.
Do you reckon we come on there on more?
Well, I'd just change the subject completely and start to really bring, because we're focusing on very much, and rightly so, on food production, but we haven't started to talk about how we address this biodiversity loss, which Tom's just told us is such a massive problem. And rewilding's being heralded as this way of doing that. But the difficulty with that is if you do rewilding in a really pure sense of the term, you're not producing any food. And in this country, in Britain as a whole, we don't necessarily have the space because we're so densely populated and so much land is already given over to agriculture. We don't really have the sort of the option of taking large tracts of land out of agriculture and putting them into rewilding programs using ecological restoration, even if we know that that would have biodiversity benefits and carbon sequestration benefits, so climate benefits, and also possibly flood management and water management benefits, natural flood management and things like that. But then the question is, how do you get any food, can you get any food production out of that? And if you can, how much does it cost? Because we've already talked about how you need scale to do this, and that we've got families who can't afford the food that's available now or are making difficult choices to buy really high quality, high value food, but perhaps at the expense of other things. The food that could be produced in a sort of agri-rewilding scheme where you get a few domestic cattle that are being farmed in a really extensive way, so extensive that stocking densities are really low, meat production is really low volume, really high cost. How on earth do you make that affordable for people? And the answer is probably that you don't, unless you really change your consumption habits. Without just outsourcing some of that production to somewhere else. And then the minute we've got imported meat on our shelves that's much lower cost compared to meat that might be produced here in an agri-rewilding system that's really high cost, people are much more likely, well, it's what you said, they'll buy the best food they can afford, but if they can't afford this really high value meat, just in a really high welfare way that has positive environmental impacts, you really.
Anyone else wants to come in that, or?
Yeah, it's a really good point on wilding, and suggests, or some people might be sitting here thinking, well, maybe the simplest thing is I give up meat and we'll just eat more of a plant-based diet. So there'd be a couple of points to make on that. First of all, as the UK, although we've got an example of someone who can do some fantastic horticulture, we don't have a lot of horticulture in the UK at the moment. Actually, the political environment for producing more horticulture is really not good. But equally, it's really to do with the land. So if I talk about my own farm in Wales, it's Wales. Okay, we call it the green grass of home. It grows grass. Grass grows where your ground isn't quite so good. There are places on my farm where the bedrock is about that far below the soil, literally. And there are places on my farm where the bedrock is about that far above the soil. When you can turn the soil over at all, it's full of stones. And if it's not full of stones, it's so full of clay that if you stood on it, you sink to your knees in really wet weather. So can we grow more plant-based food? Yes, we can. Can we grow it commercially? No, we can't. Okay, the thought of sending a combine harvester or a potato harvester down tiny little roads in Wales into 4-acre fields where it would literally go into the field, turn around and come back out again because they are that small. So my farm is about, it's just over 700 acres. Now I don't know where Michael is, he's from West Sussex. So I've got a friend who's farming over in that area of the world, and he has got one field that is half the size of my farm. Okay, so when you're looking at efficiency of sending a machine into that field to drive up and down, plant the potatoes, whatever it's going to do, in really, really good soil is what, really, you were talking about grade 1 and grade 2 soil, not my grade 3B in Wales. That is very efficient, and that is going to produce very economic food compared to what you do in Wales. So I can grow it, but no one's going to want to buy it because it will be the stabby looking carrot on the shelf or the potato that never really, well, it's probably like eating a walnut. So it's those sorts of things. It's how do we grow the food that you say you want to eat? And then you need to add into it the nutrition. You know,
I think you go unpick what efficiency means. I mean, it has efficiently removed almost all biodiversity from that farm. I mean, from that, whatever it is, 200-acre field. It's poured lots of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Yeah, it's produced a lot of food at a very low price. But as I say, I mean, farming is such a negligible part of our economy anyway. Why are we concentrating on the price? I mean, food could be twice the price at a farm gate. And you wouldn't even notice when you go to the shop, because what you pay in the shop, 6 times as much of it is going to the post-farm gate food chain as goes to the farm. If you want cheap food, it's not about what goes in the field. You could grow potatoes in a 4-acre field and it would cost you 50% more to produce them, and you wouldn't even notice in the shop. So, it's the forces that have shaped agriculture are just completely bonkers. And when you go to London on the train or look out of the window and actually question yourself, we've got the idea that this is a green and pleasant land. I mean, is it hell? I mean, really, you look at most fields of grass, when you go and walk into them, it's just ryegrass fed with nitrogen fertilizer, there is no biodiversity there at all. There's very little life in the soil. It is completely mad, that we've settled for this, and it's not inevitable. I mean, you could even go to Switzerland. I know food is very expensive in Switzerland. They do have very different patterns of agriculture, and a lot more people working on the land on much smaller farms. We've got to the level now where you're just driving agriculture for food to be ever cheaper. Our wonderful Prime Minister had a food summit last week at number 10. And, primarily because, it's a bit rough, isn't it? Actually, food has gone down in price all my life. Cheaper, 30% of income after the war, probably 20% when I started, 15%. We're down to 8 or 10% now, of people's income going on food. I mean, why the hell does it have to be any cheaper? I mean, why didn't he have a summit of private landlords? Because people spend 4 times as much on rent, the lowest quartile of incomes, poorest 25%, spend 4 times as much on rent as they do on food. So why does food have to always get cheaper when the cost of it being cheaper is just destroying our country and destroying the future for our children?
Well, I get Tom to on this.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, connects to much of this discussion. One of the things that happens here is that farming is an incredibly marginal, it's a really difficult business. It's very hard to make a good living as a farmer, as I understand it. Realize I'm not speaking from experience here. We have and our farmers, even those large scale farmers in the east of the country who are in the sort of bread market, they're still competing in a global market, the American Midwest and Brazil and these places that can produce on, vastly larger scales than we can. What you really have is a system that's been judged on a single performance metric, which always distorts the system. If your main income as a farmer is the yield of production and historically in the subsidy scheme, the area of land that you own, then your system is distorted in order to focus on efficiently producing yield and participating in that economy, which is dictated by economies of scale. But what farmers are really doing is providing a whole suite of other services that Guy mentioned: water quality, biodiversity, soil carbon sequestration, all of these things. So I think the move that we're trying to make in the UK to pay farmers more, the more diverse range of services that they provide is in many ways a really healthy one. I think there's some problems with the delivery of the system at the moment, and I don't think it's an easy thing to do. Quantifying and valuing all of those services is very complex things to do. But it's a step in the direction of recognizing that farmers do something much more complex than the fundamental service of providing food, and there are many other elements. If we want if we want a particular set of outcomes that are more holistic and more sustainable, then more different elements of that system need to be valued, and there need to be ways of rewarding farmers for providing those services.
Yeah, so that idea of how we change farming support payments at the moment, having left the EU and having left common agricultural policy, means that we're currently rewriting our agricultural policy, and we're making it agri-environment policy or rural policy rather than just purely about farming and purely about, at the moment, essentially the basic area payment gives farmers an agricultural support payment for the amount of land they farm. And that's going to change. And certainly in England, agricultural policy has devolved across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So it's going to be different in all those places. But in England, the emphasis is very much on public money for public goods. So rather than being given agricultural support payment, depending on how much land you farm, you might be given a support payment for providing carbon sequestration, for leaving larger field margins that allow biodiversity to flourish. So these things that probably once upon a time we thought farmers were doing automatically, and they were doing automatically. You know, if you go back before, probably before the First World War, we had to become much more self-sufficient in terms of farming, then much smaller farms, much less intensive production, and there was much more coexistence of agriculture and wildlife. But now with this specialization that we've been talking about, there's less and less room for wildlife on our farms. So what these agri-environmental schemes will do, in theory, is sort of support farmers to start farming in that way again, rather than just intensification of food production. And it will mean that the cost of the amount or the price they get for food is less important, because they're getting income from all these other things that they're providing.
Just in a moment, we will go to the audience for questions as well. So do start thinking, please, if you can. But Tom.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to pick up on one other point that the point Guy made about you know, our expectations around how much we pay for food. You say that the price is the key driver, but we have a cultural expectation to pay incredibly little for food, and there's a real problem there. And that you know, underlying all of this is a need to recognize that the kinds of food and the amounts we currently consume are unsustainable. There's a really valuable concept that was developed a few years ago now called the planetary health diet, which is the kind of imaginary idealized diet. If you take a global population of 8 to 10 billion people, what do you think can provide all of those people with a sufficient healthy diet to give them good quality of life in this planetary boundaries defined, as I said earlier. And that diet does look like a diet with significantly less meat and dairy, which I think is something that we have to, you know, as Europeans, North Americans, is something that we have to confront at some point. But I don't think that it means demonizing our livestock production and our livestock industries in this country. I think what it really means is imagining a world where we could be really proud of livestock that's produced well in ways that are ecologically sensitive, in ways that work for the systems that we have, without trying to compete with livestock produced in, you know, farms of 10,000 cattle in the US fed on soybeans from Brazil. It's the world that I like to imagine.
That's amazing. Well, I had a lot more things to ask about. The conversation's going away from us. It's been incredibly interesting. I'm sure the audience will fill in some of the gaps that I've left. So can we have some audience questions, please? Anyone who has any, please do direct them to somebody, the whole panel or an individual or two individuals. But as long as we have some idea who to answer first. Yeah, there. Yeah.
Abi, what's your experience of the change in the policy landscape, the farmer on the ground being affected by these environmental management schemes?
Yeah, so in Wales, for a start, I go to a lot of sort of conferences and events, and we talk as England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales, and I'll hear people who will put up all of the different schemes on the board where they are. They're not fully developed, and they will keep pointing to Wales and say, at the moment, this is the best. And the reason that the new payment for farming may look better in Wales is because there's a promise that there will be this baseline payment. So regardless of what that farm does, what they're producing, whatever, there will be something there that's just that stability payment to get them going. However, it's equally been incredibly controversial because at the moment, one of the key actions that you will need to meet in order to qualify for that basic payment is the Welsh Government are suggesting that farmers put 10% of their land over to trees. And it's been very controversial because it depends, well, if you think of, so I've got 700 acres, okay? You can use existing trees, but you need to be up to 10% by the time you get to the end of it. And you're not allowed to include hedgerows. You know, hedgerows are like the most iconic thing and they're clearly a tree, but you're not allowed to include those. So I've got 700 acres and I've got just over 35 acres of trees, which means I'm going to need another 35 acres to plant. Now, an acre is the size of a football pitch. So the Welsh Government is going to ask me to plant 35 football pitches of trees on my farm. That's going to take up probably 3 fields. It will mean that I would have to get rid of about 30 cows in order to do it. So suddenly my herd size will shrink from 200 to 170, which means that probably one of my staff, and we employ 4 people on the farm, one of them is going to have to go. We won't be able to afford them. I'll obviously be producing less milk, probably so will my neighbours, because they'll be doing the same. So there'll be less people living and working in the countryside. Then there will be less milk produced overall, which means that the supermarket that we sell to is going to lose their amount of milk. So they might think, do you know what? We're not going to get it from this country, buy it from England. And you might start seeing this depopulation of the countryside. And then you get this thing called critical mass. And that's, you know, I really understand, and I'm very sympathetic to what we're saying about reducing livestock numbers. But if you lose your critical mass, so that is your amount of livestock that's going through the slaughterhouse, the processing factory, whatever it is, they're going to go. So if you go to parts of Wales that are a little bit more remote, you go over towards Aberystwyth way, employment in that area, particularly if you look around, it's just sort of on the Ceredigion border, the only 2 main employers there, one is a meat slaughterhouse and one is a milk factory. So if you take those out of there, what's left for employment in that area? So it's not to say that therefore we call ourselves defeatists and we give up, but we just need to think about the impact it's going to have on the rural economy. Maybe society will decide that the rural economy and the rural communities are going to have to be the fall guy in this. I'm not sure. That's just what I'm going to point out.
Guys, go ahead.
Yeah, no, we've got to have a bit of an argument, and we can't agree all night. I mean, but that is, you know, that's why I'm left the NFU 20 years ago, and I'll never join again, because you always end up arguing for the status quo. The status quo is a disaster. Okay, you don't have to produce less milk. You can grow some trees in your fields and have cows grazing amongst them. I know that's not an easy thing to do. I know it's expensive to establish trees like that, but it is possible to do it, and you would not reduce your milk production. Actually, you might even increase it, and you'd sequester carbon. You know, but the sort of regressive defence of the things as they are, which the NFU, I'm afraid, has been so guilty over the years. You know, I've got to push back against it. I just don't think what you said is true at all. And you wouldn't have this idea that you're going to run it down the whole, you know, there's going to be no employment. Rubbish. You'd employ more people to do, you know, to plant those trees and tend them. It takes a lot of time. Some of them could be nut trees. They could be producing nuts, which would massively increase your production. You can produce nuts and graze cows without reducing the productivity of the cows and quadruple the amount of protein you
let Abi come as the Deputy President of FU Wales.
So I am going to become ready. So I am painting a picture that could become a reality, and I have to paint that because that represents a number of farmers. But Gaia will push back to you, because I will absolutely walk every walk. And we have a trial on the farm at the moment, which is an agroforestry trial. I've planted 4 acres of trees. So I've taken 4 acres of land out of production. For the last 2 years, it's made me 0 money because I'm waiting for them to be established. If I can bloody well get proof of concept that it will work and it's growing, actually it's a little bit more specialist than what you're talking about. I'm not interested in a tree that grows nuts. I'm looking at trees that will maybe produce soya that can grow on the Welsh landscape, could feed cows, reduce methane, control ammonia and add organic matter back to the soil. There are opportunities out there. They are not there yet, and they are not going to save the farmers in Wales that I represent. So I totally agree with you. We have to think outside the box, but it's not here at the moment, and there is not enough research there to keep these people in business. So these are the things we need to think about.
These are fledgling things and they do need government support and you know, it's on the agroforestry, the development is just absolutely pathetic. I mean, it was Tom, you said how difficult it was to get public money for public goods into action. But I mean, at the moment, they're just the forestry and the agriculture people are just sort of arguing about whose fiefdom it's going to be. It's just pathetic.
I want to get Ginny in quickly as well. I didn't, Abby, if you want to come in, then we'll go back to the audience, but Ginny, you go ahead.
Well, then the other question is, do we start thinking about other rural economies other than agriculture? So what you hear from rewilding a lot and ecological restoration is that if we just completely rethink the way we use our landscape, is we can be creating new rural jobs by getting people working in ecological restoration, by getting people working in environmental tourism and ecotourism, and creating jobs that way. Now, is it going to be enough to sort of replace all the farming jobs overnight? Probably not. But if we're really thinking outside the box and thinking radically, do we need to really shift the way we think about the rural economy?
We'll go to Abby one or something, then we'll get to the audience more questions.
Yeah.
But Abby, what?
Well, I'll keep it really brief. It's just, you know, that's fine, but if we're not producing the same level of food as we are now, to get it from somewhere else, another country, what are they doing? That's really all we need to know.
Okay, let's get some more audience questions then. Yeah, that.
It's been really interesting to hear everyone contributing, that no one's sort of highlighted the level of waste. There's 40% of the waste that we produce in the UK that are wasted. Therefore, it tells me that there is enough food for everyone. Why are we wasting to that level? Where are the gaps, and how can we possibly address that at the first base?
Does anyone in particular want to jump on that?
Right, waste is a very emotive thing. I mean, some waste in the field of vegetables, you know, is not such a bad thing, and they get brought down and they feed the next crop or whatever. But to sort of waste, you know, there's the stuff that really intensive. Well, I mean intensive in terms of environmental services, particularly, well, any meat that's left, any of the carcass that's not consumed, you know, is an environmental disaster. You know, any processed food that's wasted is an environmental disaster. But yeah, I mean, it is shocking that we waste that amount of food. And in our country, it's the result of an appalling, you know, food chain. I would say actually it's the result of the obsessive, again, market force mentality that the customer, the food citizen, must be able to have whatever they want, whenever they want it, and pay bugger all for it. I mean, that's where the waste comes from. If we just valued it a bit more highly and accepted seasonality and expected a bit more variation in the cosmetic appearance of our food, we wouldn't have the waste.
You would come in there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the point's covered eloquently by Guy, but I think really the point is, you know, a significant part of that waste is the flip side of the give us, you know, very high production, very reliable production of a small number of core crops and very cheap food. And it's a systemic problem, and it's partly comes back to what we expect of our food. But it's also partly about an incredible concentration of power within that system. So that the global food system has this incredible hourglass shape, where there's 2 billion odd producers, 8 billion odd consumers, and in the middle there's fewer than 20 corporate institutions that control the majority of both the production and ultimately the food chain. Those are the people with the real leverage to address those issues of waste. And I don't know the solution, but part of it is about thinking, as Guy said, about what the real value of that material is, how you make sure that value is recognized in the system. I think there are always two ends of the food system that we need to be thinking about. There's this incredible simplification and overproduction and overconsumption. There are also, you know, more than 1 billion hungry, undernourished people in the world. And there are very different issues around food waste for much of the global south, where a lack of infrastructure, a lack of refrigeration, lack of irrigation and reliable crop varieties mean that people are incredibly vulnerable to on-farm losses of food. That's a similar volume of food that is wasted every year, mostly that is needed by people who are far more vulnerable than the food that is wasted in the industrialized food system. And that really needs addressing too, and through investment in infrastructure and access to energy and things like that.
We're gonna have one more very quick question and then we'll wrap up. I know our speakers have places they need to get to, but yeah, up at the very top, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to ask a panel about soil quality and erosion. I'm not an expert in the field at all. I know it's something that can greatly reduce the quality of the soil and therefore the output of that soil. And according to what I know, at least in the next like 20 or 30 years, it could basically stop around 40% of the arable soil we have now from being able to output anything. So I wanted to ask what you guys thought was the best or most efficient way to stop that problem, and if it's actually achievable under the current economic system we have. And it's directed to the top panel, sorry.
Of course. Does anyone want to comment on that? It will be our set of answers, so if anyone wants to do.
Starting with the state, and is this where does the solution for this problem lie? In the environmental land management scheme, one of the things it's looking at, or one of the things that farmers will be incentivized, is to improve the quality of their soil. So if that's financially incentivized at farm level, then there's an incentive for doing it, and there's clearly state directive to make that happen, certainly in England.
Yeah, everyone's going very quickly and then I'm afraid, but
I'm going to be quite a long time. I mean, this is incredibly important. The only way to solve this, basically agriculture, as in cultivating the land, is bad for the soil. You can't get away from it. If you plow it, if you spray chemicals on it, if you put fertilizer on it, you are destroying the life in the soil. And I say that as a vegetable farmer, which is the very worst form of agriculture for the soil. We absolutely beat the hell out of the soil in order to get straight carrots and so on and get an even seed bed. The only sort of solution I can really see that we can feed 10 billion people in a sustainable way is to try and grow more perennial crops. And there are actually very few perennial food crops in temperate latitudes. I mean, if you go to the tropics, it's much easier, but a lot of the crops that we do grow, the big, maize, wheat, rice, I mean, their progenitors, their wild forebears were all perennial plants. We've turned them into annuals, and there is quite a lot of work being done with zero funding from industry and zero funding from states around the world. The Land Institute in the States is leading this work on perennializing crops with some success. I mean, there is 40,000 hectares of perennial rice being grown in China now. And this has there is a perennial wheat, I have to say, probably not that great yet. But I mean, if you look at the amount of money that's gone into GM crops, it would be like 1,000, 100,000 times more than it's gone into perennializing crops. Because of course, once you perennialize it, you're not going to sell someone's seed every year. So there's no commercial incentive for a seed company to do this. But this could be absolutely huge. It could be a massive game changer in terms of the feed ourselves, sustainably. And, I do say, and organic farming doesn't have all the answers either. Our land is actually in pretty good heart. I think we have pretty healthy soils, but my God, growing vegetables on steep Devon fields, I mean, with changing weather patterns, is really risky. And we have had some really tragic soil losses and it's part of the reason why we are looking at agroforestry on the farm to get more perennials in the crop and reduce the fetch of the rain, down the slope, and yet try and be productive at the same time. But it is a real challenge how we maintain our soil and feed 10 billion people globally.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we're getting to the end of time, so I know our speakers have to rush off. I have a few people thank first of all. Thank you so much for the GSI for reaching out to us to organise this event. It's been fantastic working with all. I want to give a special shout out to Alina, who has done so much of the work for this, who has almost everything we do. But we'll, the debate side will be heading to the RAM afterwards to continue the discussion. So if anyone wants to join us, you are absolutely welcome. We'd love to see you there. Members of our committee will be walking up, so if you don't know where you're going, just follow us along or wait around. We can walk you up and everything. For the wine, I'm going to give it to that very last question at the end about soil at the top there. So come get that later on. Biggest thank you is to our speakers who have been fantastic. Thank you all so much for coming along. It was a pleasure to have you tonight. So really